burial place known as the Hypogeum of Hal Cephalini was so named after the street under which it was discovered in the early years of the last century. Hypogeum is the Latin name for an underground structure. Many experts believe it was originally built as a temple of worship and should be recognized as the eighth wonder of the ancient world. Near the floor of the last chamber in the third and last officially recognized sublevel of these ancient catacombs, there are a small number of so-called burial chambers. These are only a few feet square and situated right next to the floor. In fact, one must get on one's knees to look into them. These burial chambers are just large enough for one to crawl through. It has been rumored for years that one of these burial chambers does not end, but continues into deeper and unexplored caverns beyond. This, according to certain sources, was the subterranean passage and chamber referred to in an article which appeared in the 1940 August issue of the National Geographic magazine. The article stated the following concerning several people who disappeared in these catacombs without a trace. Many subterranean passageways, including ancient catacombs, now are a part of the island's fortifications and defense system. Supplies are kept in many tunnels, others in bomb shelters. Underneath Valletta, some of the underground areas served as homes for the poor. Prehistoric man built temples and chambers in these vaults. In the pit beside one sacrificial altar, thousands of human skeletons were found. Years ago, one could walk underground from one end of Malta to the other. The government closed the entrances to these tunnels after school children and their teachers became lost in the labyrinth while on a study tour and never returned. The story, however, goes much deeper than the National Geographic article indicates. Other sources say that about 30 children vanished in these catacombs on a study tour, and when the Hypogeum was first discovered, nearly 30,000 human skeletons of men, women, and children, victims of an ancient sacrifice to the underworld gods performed by old Neolithic race, were discovered as well. One article written by Louis Jessup, at the time an employee of the British Embassy and later secretary of the New York Saucer Information Bureau, appeared in an old issue of Riley Crabb's Borderline Science magazine, published by the Borderline Sciences Research Foundation, and was later reprinted in full in Dr. Allen's book Enigma Fantastique. Miss Jessup claimed that she visited Malta and also the Hypogeum, once before the tragic disappearance of the children and shortly after. She described how, on her first visit to the catacombs, she finally convinced the guide to allow her to investigate one of the so-called burial chambers near the floor of the last chamber in the third sub-basement, the supposed end of the Hypogeum tour. He seemed to know something she didn't, but finally consented and told her that she could enter at her own risk. As she so did, candle in hand and her loosed sash used as a guide rope for her friends who followed behind. She crawled through the small passage and eventually emerged into a large cavern, where she found herself on a ledge overlooking a very deep, seemingly bottomless chasm. Below, on the other side of the chasm, was another ledge which appeared to lead to a doorway or tunnel in the far wall. She realized that what happened might next sound unbelievable to many who read this, but we asked that others drop their own conclusions as to its validity. Miss Jessup swears that what follows really happened. She claims that out of this lower tunnel on the far side of the chasm emerged in single file several very large creatures of humanoid form, but completely covered with hair from head to foot. Noticing her, they raised their arms in her direction, palms out, at which point a violent wind began to blow through the cavern, snuffing out her candle. Then something wet and slippery, apparently a creature of a different sort, brushed past her. This all happened just as the person behind her was beginning to come out of the passage and into the cavern. They could not understand her panic attempts to get back into the Hypogeum room, but they consented after she insisted. When they found themselves back in the Hypogeum chamber, the guide saw her expression and gave her a knowing look. About a week afterwards, news about the disappearance of the children and their teachers broke out. On her second visit, she saw an entirely new guide, who denied that the other guide had ever worked there, and surmised that this new guide was hiding something. She learned more from cooperative sources, however, that this was the tunnel which the children and their teachers, and possibly the old guide, had entered. She also learned that after the last child had made it through, the walls of the small tunnel just happened to collapse or cave in. Although the official version stated that the walls caved in on the students, search parties were never able to locate any trace of the teachers or the children, although the rope they had used to fasten themselves to the lower Hypogeum chamber was found to have been cut clean by something sharp and not falling rock. It was alleged that for weeks afterwards, the wailing and screaming of children was heard underground in different parts of the island, but no one could locate the sources of the cries. As for the catacombs under Malta itself, there are some ancient accounts that say the deep caverns under the island continue underground beyond the shore, and according to one source, that is the ever-elusive Commander X, part of this labyrinth stretches hundreds of miles northwards and intersects with catacombs